And a very good evening to you, and welcome to Politics 101, our Tuesday night edition. I want to thank all of you who are joining us. Tonight we're going to have a discussion with the young Elson Low, and we're going to be talking about economics, the oil industry, and related issues. We're going to be having a general discussion with the young man about where things are in our country. And of course, on this program, we do not just criticize, but we offer solutions. Because I think criticism in itself is a means towards, if you're criticizing something, you are in effect saying that I have an alternative. So we're going to be talking to Elson Low tonight about that. I would like to welcome all of you. I want to thank Mark Benshop, Mark, for sitting in for me last night. I had to teach later than I envisaged, and Mark was gracious enough to sit in for me. And I want to thank you all for showing him the same kind of love. Of course, you're all showing love on Straight Up, but to show him the kind of love on Politics 101, I'm thankful to you all. So welcome. And it was good to see Ben Shop on Politics 101. And hopefully we can do more of that, Ben Shop. And Ben Shop is big on that. Ben Shop sitting in for me, and I hopefully will be doing the same, sitting in for him from time to time. And I think it's a good initiative. Welcome everyone down to our program Tuesday night, and I'd like to welcome Sandra, David, Annette Cummins is quite a regular. Donna Liverpool. Donna, good evening to you. Good evening to you, Claudette Bovell, Lois. Welcome to our program tonight. Ingrid Ambrose, welcome to Politics 101. Please share the link so that everyone knows that we are on. Quite a lot is happening. The teachers have been given that little small piece by the president. The president refusing to meet with the union and honor the collective bargaining agreement. We have a fact-finding mission visiting Guyana. That fact-finding mission from Atlanta area. We would like to welcome them to Guyana, and we wish them the best of luck in terms of gathering the kind of information that they are looking for. The understanding is that they're going to be speaking to a wide cross-section of Guyanese organizations and Guyanese people to get a sense of what's happening in our country. And so we would like to welcome that fact-finding mission to our shores, and to see that despite the fact that others may be deeming that mission politically, we think that is a good development for our country. And we leave it at that for the moment, because we don't want to bias the commission. And so we leave it there. But clearly the government, after meeting with a delegation of state representatives from New York, and I understand some folks are coming from Canada, and it has decided not to meet with this delegation. I think that in itself sends a message. But we shall see. We shall see. I am prepared to speak more on this issue probably next week when the mission would have finished its work. The Trade Union Congress, TUC, just finished its annual conference, and we're going to be hearing from them later on this week or early next week on the deliberations there. Tomorrow night, we're going to have Coretta McDonald on to talk about the teacher situation. She's going to be on tomorrow night. So we are going to be hearing what's happening there in the teachers union. Where we are tonight, the guns and the bombs are raining in Gaza still. We pray for humanity. We pray for humanity. Our world has really slipped to the point where I think we have to question whether there is a universal respect for shared humanity. We have to question that. I cannot rationalize what's happening there in Gaza. I cannot rationalize it. And I've heard people rationalize it. I just cannot rationalize it. I'm not blaming one side or the other, because I think once you begin to share blame, you lose sight of the real issue. And the real issue is, do we have a shared respect for humanity? You know, we have always raised the question, what it is to be a human being. After the experience of enslavement, in our case, over 200 years in the history of the Americas, 400 years, and we've had to deal with that question, what it is to be a human being. What it is to be a human being. What it is to be a human being. Those of us who are praying people, we pray for the people of the Middle East, especially the Palestinians, especially the Palestinians. Not only the Palestinians, but especially the Palestinians. Good evening, good evening. Good evening to you all. We have our issue with Venezuela, which our government is taking lightly. And they can only take it lightly for narrow political reasons. Political parties will be political parties. But when everything is reduced to the political party, to the leadership of the political party, then we have lost some serious screws. And the more I study this government in its current manifestation, when it's in its longer trajectory, the more I'm wondering whether this government has any respect for our shared humanity. That's my indictment of this government. I'm prepared to give any government to cut them some slack for doing stupidness. You know? But this is beyond stupidness when we watch this government at work. We'll talk a little bit more about that tonight. Good evening to you. Good evening to all of you. Again, let me thank Brother Mark Benchop for sitting in for me last night. And thank you for holding the fort while I was gone. And we're back. We're back tonight. And like I said, Elson Low, young man, who what's the term now? I have a lot of time for, that's the new jargon. I have a lot of time for. He's on tonight and he's ready. So let us bring him on and begin the conversation. Brother Elson Low, good evening.
Good evening, good evening. Always good to be on again.
Yes, this invitation was extended weeks ago since we were in Washington. And as I explained, I've now gotten around to it. So we have a lot to talk about. And I've been reading your comments and perspectives in the press, especially as they relate to the economy, in particular the oil section of our economy. But I want to start off our discussion tonight in a general way. Yeah. And so I want to talk about what goes into managing an economy, you know? There are levels of analysis. One can analyze human phenomenon at the individual level. We can analyze it at the level of the family, the community, the political party. But as one gets to government, I suppose one expects a different level of understanding of what goes into managing. Now, you manage the family budget. It's quite an undertaking. I take my hats off to women for always doing an excellent job at managing unmanageable family budgets, especially when you're poor, as most of our citizens are. But when you get to the level of the government, I suppose one has to begin to think at another level. And I have had problems with post-colonial governments in Guyana, in our wider Caribbean and wider field. I've had problems with the Burnhams and the Eric Williamses and so on. In terms of the way they've managed, our countries post-independence. But the one thing I cannot fault them for, and that is at the level of vision. You really couldn't, you were a young man, but you couldn't look at the Burnham in action and Eric Williams and Michael Manley, Errol Barrow. You couldn't look at them in action and say these men. And then later on we had women, Eugenia Childs and Janet Jagan and in Trinidad. Her name escapes me now. But we've had women. The one thing you couldn't fault them for was vision. They had the methods they used. You could have problems, but they did believe that Guyana and Trinidad and Barbuda and Nevis and the Caribbean, that we were a serious part of civilization, the world civilization, and that managing our small but complex political economies was something that you had to pay serious attention to and bring to it a level of understanding and intellectual curiosity that one could be excused for not doing it in your individual business, the family business or so. As you look at the present government And from your understanding of that long arc of governance that we have had since independence, where do you situate this government, or in local parlance, how do you judge them?
Well, funny enough, I actually was having a quick chat with Hamilton Green a while back. I know that generation would remember the independence struggle and how difficult things were, and he seemed pessimistic. He said it feels just like it used to feel before independence, where the politicians or those in charge didn't really appreciate the struggle of the average person. And it is sad that the current people who are in charge don't seem to get the efforts that were taken across the board, whether it is Garner, whether it is Jagan, whether it is Martin Carter, to move Guyana from being in a position where we didn't have the type of rights that we have right now to being in a position where we can hold our heads high, at least from the perspective of being citizens. That I think has boiled over to a government that is not grounded in things like anti-poverty. It's not grounded in things like education because it is important for people's development, not just because of economic benefit. It's not grounded in better health care because it is important to provide better health care. Not grounded in the idea of justice for justice sake. These are all, I think, more broadly things to be concerned about. But what I would say that is concretely led to is a government that isn't particularly focused on outcomes. And so as a result, doesn't set targets or doesn't set meaningful targets, doesn't try to meet those targets, just kind of spends money. And in the process of spending money, hopes that there'll be some kind of progress without having a structured approach. And if you're serious about governance, if you value on a deep level the independence that we've got as a country, if you understand the sacred duty of a government is to alleviate poverty, is to give people education opportunities, is to improve people's health care, then you would approach it from the perspective that you intend to accomplish certain outcomes. What we see, and education is just a classic example, is an education budget under them that has grown by 80%, but where math and English, math performances in particular, are 10% worse than they were under the coalition with a far smaller budget. But that's at the CSEC level. And so you're spending far more money, but you're performing worse. And so the question is, I mean, what are you doing with this money? Where is this money going? And of course, that is juxtaposed with the sad reality of what the Guyana Trade Union Congress recently, the Guyana Teachers Union recently indicated, which is that only 37% of teachers will be benefiting from these meager salary increases that were announced recently. Now, I say all this to say that we've got to ensure that we've got a government that is focused on delivering better for people rather than just spending money. The reason that the opposition is talking about a people-centered vision is we believe that we need to have good outcomes. We can't just spend money and hope that the problems will be fixed. And then when you look at the actual results, you're performing worse or you're performing at the same rate, but your national budget is triple. This is disturbing. There's even recently in the news it was indicated that Guyana has one of the highest rates of childhood malnutrition in South America.
Yeah.
It is absurd that a government can triple the national budget. It is absurd that a country's economy can triple and you have the highest rate of childhood malnutrition in South America. And when you throw that in perspective on a purchasing power basis, the country has a higher per capita income than the United Kingdom. This really can only come from people who are not grounded in the everyday experience that Guyanese feel, who don't take seriously the struggles that previous generations went through to get us to this point, and therefore treat power and treat the ability to help people as a bygone thing, something that they're not really paying attention to. What they're paying attention to, as many would attest, is how best to fill their pockets.
Yeah, and you said something there that really struck accord with me. And one is driven by experience, as Ami would say. I mean, you come out of communities in the colonial times and the post-colonial era, and poverty is all around you. And some of us were able, through luck or happenstance, to crawl our way out of the ghetto, so to speak. We go to universities, we get our degrees, and we feel a commitment that if we are in positions to make a difference, we are making a difference because we remember.
Yeah.
You know, I remember when we used to sit around the fire and drink cornmeal porridge, of which I share with you. I'm quoting Bob Marley here. I remember when Georgie would light the fire, you know, and we sit around the fire and drink cornmeal. There's the artist remembering, and Marley is saying, you know, oh, my little sister, don't cry. No, woman, don't cry. Everything is going to be all right. Here is the artist coming out of the ghetto and singing to the ghetto and for the ghetto and consoling his little sister. No woman, no cry. The politician is like an artist also. You know, Yussi Kwayana has this thing where he said, you know, we are like a gardener with a watering can, watering the plants and the flowers, you know, giving them that nurturing that they need. And so as you look at this crowd that's in power, you're wondering, as you put it, where is the grounding? You know, they come from the same place that you come from, and that I come from, and that all of us come from. Some of us got out a little bit earlier than some, but we all come from that place. And you're wondering, does that not mean something? Does it not ring a bell in your ears? As you drive in your fancy cars, and you look at people going about their business, where their faces are strained and anxious, and it doesn't mean nothing to you. I am afraid that these are creatures that I don't know who they are. I cannot recognize them because they are bereft of moorings. How can you not see education, which is responsible for most of them, which is responsible for you and me, which is responsible for all of us, managing to crawl our way out of harm's way, that arm of poverty? How can you not in a position, when you're in a position of authority, not think about education and not give education the priority? As we were talking before the show started, if we got education right, we get most other things right.
Yes, I couldn't agree more.
We get a lot wrong. Talk to that.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And you know, what is the point of having an economy that grows, of getting government revenues, of tripling your budget, if people are living in desperate poverty and people aren't passing mathematics at CSEC and children are malnourished? And what exactly is the function of this government? What's the point of the government if you can't deal with the critical issues? The government is just there for the sake of having a government. And that, I think, is bred in Guyanese a real frustration and a depression, really. Because people are saying, I know many Guyanese, money gonna flow, PPP in office, money gonna flow. But the money has not been flowing at all. And so there's this persistent feeling of, even amongst those who were thinking the PPP would let money flow, as they say, that they were mistaken and that it's going to be a long, hard journey here, a long, hard journey. Now, in terms of education and education policy, what is so critical for us to appreciate is that by having a good education system, we can actually improve our economy, our businesses. Guyana, according to the IDB, has some of the lowest rates of technological adoption for businesses. All of that can come from having a good education system, which will help you to adopt technologies to improve your businesses, to improve profitability, to grow the economy, to give people higher wages. That's what we're looking for. And so it is not just education because somebody said that, even though we must remember that education is valuable for its own sake, but also that we want to move the economy forward by having a good education system. Now, the government has increased the education budget by 80%, but folks, the pass rate at mathematics is still lower by 10%, 10%, than it was under the coalition with a far smaller budget. That's not what you would expect to see if people are serious about education and moving education forward. And in fact, even after they increased it by 80%, because the national budget has tripled, they are actually spending less, a smaller share of the budget on education. And the coalition was spending on education. A much smaller share of the budget is being spent. And each year that we've had access to oil revenues, a smaller and smaller share of the budget has been spent on education. Now, that is, to my mind, disturbing, and it indicates that there's no intention to focus on things like productivity and producing the types of quality businesses that can move the country forward and diversify the economy. A lot of our policies are focused on the question of productivity, not just production. Because in order to have an effective, diversified economy, we need to have businesses that are high quality, that produce high wages, that can export, and that are competitive. That is not at all the way they're looking at it. And so, as a result of that, you've got a business sector which is, according to the IDB, has the lowest level of total factor productivity, which is your technological adoption. In fact, we've said that we're going to have a productivity bank, which is specifically going to lend money for businesses to adopt new technologies, improve productive processes. We've spoken about reducing the cost of energy. And while the gas is sure, we're hoping that that is able to reduce the cost of energy. We've also spoken about the need for a reliable grid because, and this is a point we actually raised with the IMF when we met with them in Washington, if you as a business owner have to have a generator and have to be using that generator frequently because of all the blackouts, then your effective cost of electricity is quite high because the generator cost is high. So even if the gas is sure brings it down partially, the generator cost will bring it back up. So a reliable grid is also vital. But did you need me to tell you that a reliable grid was vital for businesses to flourish? You didn't need me to say that. That's obvious. And that's, I think, the most concerning thing about this is that a lot of these things, I think any leader really in Guyana's history, whether you're talking about Boredom or Jacob, if you ask Rodney about it, he's going to tell you, no, don't focus on a reliable electricity supply. Everybody will say that. He's going to say, no, don't focus on a good education system. Who would say that? And so you've got some people who are totally divorced from any kind of reality or good governance. And as a result, people don't ask in Guyana, when, if we're going to get blackout today. People now ask when we get blackout. We expect to get blackout every single day. And so our policies that from the opposition's perspective are policies that are focused on specific outcomes, not just on doing things and hoping that they pan out. And so people should look forward to a different type of governance when we're in office. I even mentioned recently to a USAID team that came that we're not just looking at production. We will be measuring productivity. We will be measuring the competitiveness of the businesses. We will not be satisfied with businesses just producing more. We want the best quality businesses so that they can pay high wages, be profitable, and help us to have a sustainable, diversified economy.
Elson, let me ask you this question, and it's a big man question I'm asking you. Um, we have these discourses uh, going on. We have the people who are engaged in the discourse about our environment. Um, there are those who are arguing that we cash in on the fossil fuel, but we also begin to make um, contingency plans for a transition to renewables. As I said, there are some who say that we should leave the oil where it is. There are those who are saying, Exxon is ripping us off and suggesting that, if they can't comply or they can't go on a way, they should leave. You're talking about a complex, excuse me, a complex issue. I mean, once we found oil, these are issues that were bound to come up. All right, where do you start as a young man? And you are obviously you trained in an era where you had to look at environment, you had to look at economics, you had to look at the future and all of that. How do we navigate the Exxons who are scraven, as we say in Guyana? Some the fancy people say craven, right? So we have Exxons who are scraven. We have the threat to our environment, but we also have the possibility of using the revenue, the windfall that we are getting now to deal with questions of poverty and so on. We might never get that chance again. How, as a young man, you navigate all these factors, the geopolitics that comes with oil, the fact that Venezuela is going to be on our backs more now because of oil. How as a young man, you navigate all
Well,
those.
you raised quite a few key issues. Let me try and see if I can deal with a couple of them.
Yes.
First of all, we've said many times now that once in office, we will speak with Exxon regarding getting the best possible from the existing arrangement and improvements that can be made. We've already spoken to them about areas of concern, such as with regard to the audit and the provision of data. And we've already given them some food for thought in terms of positive directions that the industry can move in once we're in office. So that's kind of your top line. And from that perspective, there's a gulf between us and the government, where the government doesn't even bring up anything with them. They could, so to speak, do whatever they feel, and the government doesn't say anything. In fact, this very week, I said that the government needs to raise these data issues, the data provision issues concerning the audit, bring it to the attention of the operator. There are some disputes regarding costs that they're claiming that Guyana has to repay, that Guyana has to pay from cost oil. I'm saying again that these costs are likely to cause problems every single audit, and therefore the government needs to speak to the operator about it. But are they going to do it? They don't have any interest, or they're scared, or they don't have Guyanese at heart, so they're not going to deal with the issues. So that is one thing where we're committed to dealing properly and head on with these types of issues. As it concerns the environment, I think it is important for us to note that our first priority has to be dealing with extreme poverty that we come across. You mentioned there's people in the nice cars. I mean, I wouldn't begrudge them. I like to drive something nice myself. But when I see children in the street begging and so on, I think to myself, we must deal with this. We must deal with it urgently, which is why, of course, I've helped the leader of the opposition to craft anti-poverty policies that will help to alleviate poverty immediately, but also help to build our education system, build our healthcare system, and reach those development outcomes. So that's also vital. But from an environmental perspective, we must not forget, and this is where there must be environmental space for us to act, that the countries that have been the polluters over the years as developed nations, really we need to see them be at the forefront of doing two things. The first is cutting their own emissions and moving to green energy and adoption of those types of environmentally friendly um, uh, uh, mechanisms, whether it's electric cars, whether it is solar electricity generation. But also, we need to see them provide finance to other countries to have them be able to adopt solar power plants or hydro plants and so on. They need to provide that finance. You've heard many leaders across the Caribbean cry out for that kind of support, and many leaders across the developing world say that they need. I think the most recent is in Rwanda. I think is the last country that was saying that they need finance for those types of things. So that is the other thing that we need to see. So in the meanwhile, while developed countries, we ask them to provide the support that they really should provide. We intend to ensure we make the best use of these resources. And to me, I look forward to the day when Guyana is so developed and so well managed that we're thinking about how we can help Haiti, that we're thinking about how we can help uh, poor parts of India, that we're thinking about how we can help develop poor parts of Africa, Congo, as an example, that we're looking at those types of things. But we'll only get there if we make good use of our resources, develop our economy well, and then put those resources to use in the right way once we develop them. If we get it wrong in terms of our development, we could end up like one of the many examples of oil nations that have not actually seen their citizens' well-being improved. The most prominent example being one I cite often in Equatorial Guinea, where you've got at one point they had a GDP per capita higher than Spain, but 75% poverty. Right now in Guyana, we've got a GDP per capita purchasing power higher than the UK, but 40 something percent poverty. So it is looking very similar to some of those worst case scenarios. So we've got a lot of work to do on our front in order to move forward. There are international dynamics to the oil industry, but we have to navigate them. And I would say one last thing that is bizarre and concerning is the government doesn't seem to understand that it can just hire international experts to help it to navigate these pathways, hire international law firms, hire seasoned oil and gas personnel, develop the Ministry of Natural Resources so that it is substantial. One of the things I even mentioned when I was chatting with Comrade Green, Hamilton Green, he mentioned that he had been to Libya, and I said to him if he'd ever seen the Libyan oil ministry. Massive building, lots of people involved. Saudi Arabia, massive operations. In Guyana, Ministry of Natural Resources, a little tiny building here and there, hardly any staff. We need to develop that capacity to be able to properly manage these industries. And in the course of it, I think that we'll be able to properly develop our country and help those who need help as well.
And I know there you talked about balancing because I think, you know, as a small country, with this windfall, we have to balance all the various factors. And it's not the oil or nothing. Um, it's not the environment or nothing. It's all of those things. We need to pressure Exxon to respect our environmental laws. We need to pressure Exxon to respect our laws. Um, uh, uh, we also need that when our government gets the money, it spends it wisely. That ultimately we are not going to be able to get more out of Exxon if we don't build out leverage. And I guess when you were talking about the big buildings, you were talking about how serious these people take the oil thing. That you build up leverage tomorrow, so you can make demands on the big oil company tomorrow that you couldn't make yesterday. And do you think our government is thinking in that strategic way, in terms of building up our leverage, building up our capacity? What about a national oil company, for example? Something that Professor Thomas and the WPF floated, that we set up a national oil company that itself can bid for blocks and so on and so forth. Um, But of course, in our environment, that has to be autonomous from manipulation of the political parties, you know. But I made that point to say, do you to ask whether you think this government is thinking strategically?
Well, I'll give you two answers. I'll
Yeah.
say that from my experience dealing with them, I think their focus is not on the right things. Their focus is on how they can get rich, how they can whatever corrupt scheme they can come up with. I think that's the PPP's focus. When you look at the quality of the infrastructure works, that alone can tell you that you have a perpetual corruption there. Because as I try to remind people, a road is supposed to last you 20 years. What road do you know in Guyana PPP has built this last 20 years?
There you go.
It's difficult to find one, right?
Yes.
That is concerning. But not to say there aren't good contractors, but there's a lot of negative examples. But the other thing I would say is this: I get the impression, and this is me speaking from with my investment banker hat on, that they're not too clear as to how much money really is involved.
Yeah.
I don't think they really understand. And as a result, they're under investing in capacity to deal with the money in the way that it should be dealt with. You had the incident recently where they claim that a junior functionary was involved in reducing from 214 million US to 3 million US the costs that could be recovered. That after our audit found that about 214 million US was questionable costs that Exxon was recovering. They claim that one man in a room reduced this down to $3 million. And while they're saying that they're sanctioning him by giving him 2 weeks cut of pay, which is next to nothing, what I didn't pick up from them is an appreciation that there is no scenario in which one man in a room should be reducing costs from 214 million to 3 million.
That's right.
That's crazy. How can he be involved in a $211 million? I mean, that is supposed to incorporate a team of people and a team of experts. And so you get the impression from them that they think that the problem is that he wasn't authorized. They think the problem is that he wasn't authorized. That's one problem. But the other problem is that the whole system is too woefully inadequate. That's the other problem. And they don't seem to get that that's a problem. That is what's disturbing. It says to me they don't really understand how much money is involved. They don't have appreciation for it. When we met with the IMF, we again highlighted this is something that we confirmed as well with the operator that even the gas to shore project, the pipeline, one of the reasons that the pipeline is so expensive is because it's not located in the best location according to the feasibility study. And it's between 100 120 million US that's being wasted because of a poor choice of location without a proper feasibility study. Now, 100 million US, it seems to me, is a lot of money to be wasting for no reason at all. That's $100,000 per household. They don't have a good appreciation of what they're doing. They're wasting money without really understanding the consequences of their actions. And as a result, you need to have the right government in place. When we met with the IMF, we said we're going to be working closely with the IMF to cut down on waste and incompetence and corruption. Now, the IMF has indicated from their assessments that for every dollar spent on the government's investment program to build out better infrastructure, schools, and so on, about 41 cents for every dollar spent is lost to incompetence, corruption. I always make the remark to people that when I heard that that was the amount that was being lost, 41 cents off of every dollar, 41%, my first thought was to give back the taxpayers the money because this is a waste of time. But cooler heads prevailed, and we're going to be implementing comprehensive reforms, bringing in consultant agencies, hiring capable people, hiring young people from Guyana, and training them to carry out the kinds of analysis needed, so we can save money, it's billions of dollars on the line, and we can improve people's lives massively if we don't just waste money for no reason. And so there's two sides to it. One is the focus on corruption that they've got, but the second is a woeful misunderstanding of how to run the country, grounded in not really on getting how big of a windfall Guyana has gotten from this oil find. Guyana currently is the country with the second most barrels of oil per person in the entire world. Second most in the entire world. Uh,
For you to therefore, we circle back to our earlier comments, for you to have the highest rate of malnutrition in South America, I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing? It shows that they're way off from understanding what's required. They don't have. I recently called the president, sorry, the PPP, when they talk about the teacher salary increases. They're delusional. There is almost as if they're not in Guyana. They're not living in Guyana. They're living in some other country. They think, and I'll give you a funny story. They think Guyana has 300 million barrels of oil, right? A small amount of oil. That's how they're operating. Not like we have the second most barrels of oil in the world, past Saudi Arabia. Only one country has more barrels of oil per person than us. They're not operating like they understand that, which is tragic, because it means that the average Guyanese, whose life could be so much better tomorrow, has to sit through a difficult period and wait for the election.
Elson Low here tonight, rapping with us on all things as they relate to our economy, economic thinking, economic philosophy, economic vision, because we are at that stage. We are at that stage where young people like Elson Low and the young people in the PPP and wherever our young people are have to begin to think along that line. I mean, Elson, from the time I was a boy, there were always flatfoot hustlers. And I mean, the men who just know how to make a hustle. And they knew their limitations. And, a lot of them were able to feed their family and so on and so forth. But I think those flatfoot hustlers will tell you, boy, you can't flatfoot hustle in government. But I get the impression when I look at these chaps who run in this government, some of them who I know, not personally, but as people in the political thing, I can't help but thinking about them as flatfoot hustlers. And I hope I'm not insulting them. But I just get that impression, and this has nothing to do with my opposition to the PPP. Because I think if the PPP gets it right, Guyana gets it right, and all of us will get it right. And our political competition would be a competition on ideas rather than on incompetence and competence. So it's not that I want the PPP to do bad, but I can't help. Am I being harsh by referring to them as flatfoot hustlers, political flatfoot hustlers?
The big mystery in Guyana right now is why the PPP isn't running the country the way that, let's say, a Saudi Arabia would run the country. Hire some consultants, bring in experts, and let them do all the analysis and run the country for you properly. That is the big mystery that nobody seems to be able to answer. Because if you have money, you can bring in good people to run the country efficiently, to save money, and to give people better benefits. We have said we will be bringing in consultants, we'll be bringing in people from elite universities, we'll be hiring young people and training them. I sometimes think that the PPP thinks when in office, I'm going to go from ministry to ministry myself to go on. No, we will be hiring teams of people to conduct analysis so that it can be conducted well. It's like Elson Low doing analysis on every single ministry and coming up with ideas on every fine issue, the way that Jack Dio tries to come up with, deal with every single fine issue. Because you can't run the country well like that, especially when you're dealing with large amounts of money. You're supposed to hire people and have teams of people working on these issues. We've already talked about $100 million for the gas, the sure loss for no reason. How we almost lost hundreds and over $100 million for the audit, where they had one man in a room looking at these audits. We That is the experience that you can bring up across so many different areas, where rather than having proper expertise to run it and being able to effectively deal with things, they're not interested in that at all. And so that flat foot hustler, I guess, mentality that they have of thinking they could pull it off, is what you're seeing here. Rather than taking a step back, saying, "Oh my, look at what has happened. Let's make some changes." But to me, and I tell you a funny story. Even you mentioned Dr. Thomas. At Sarah, he and I worked together, and we discussed some of these issues. We discussed the oil finds, and we discussed the capacity for us to find more oil. Now, we discussed it in a spectrum. Well, if we have X amount of oil, how it will move and so on. But even back then, is not recently I've been talking about these things. I've been talking about the way that we should plan. 5 years now, maybe 6 years now. It's just sad that the PPP still doesn't seem to get that you have to be thoughtful in the way that you plan these things out. The leader of the opposition gets it, and that's why we've got structures in place. That's why our policies are structured policies. And that's why we're talking about bringing people to help us to run the country efficiently. It's not just going to be me, lead the opposition, other people going from ministry to ministry and searching out, dealing with fine issues, the way Jagdeo deals with all kind of random fine issues. That's not the way to run the country. That's how you make mistakes, and that's how you produce very poor development outcomes. But that's what we're faced with. We have to look forward to the election to get these folks out. And the difference for Guyanese, this is what we want them to understand, is not a marginal difference or will be slightly better. It is a day and night difference. Day and night. And one thing to give Guyanese perspective is that the PPP so far has tripled that national budget. And I'm sure they're going to continue to increase it. So there's tremendous space for us if we're going to come in and produce a similar budget or a slightly bigger budget, etc. Tremendous space for us to provide the types of programs that will improve people's lives immediately. One program, I give you an example. We've committed to providing students, this is university students, people training, $50,000 a month. And we're talking about 50,000 students we're going to do that for. Now, that means that we're giving students a brace who are studying, but also we want to incentivize people to go and learn plumbing, to go and learn mechanical engineering, to go and learn welding, to go back and get your math pass, go back and get your English pass, because we want to build up human capital. And so, while on the one hand, you'll immediately be getting something that lifts you above the poverty line, because $50,000 will be a lift, we also want to put in place policies to help people to develop their skills so that they can get high-paying jobs and move forward in their lives. That's the kind of thing that we can do pretty much right away. Raising public servant salaries, we can do that pretty much right away. We've spoken about a 50% increase that needs to happen, but it's not going to be 50% alone that public servants can look forward to. I can tell you that much, because we've got a long way to go to help those salaries to be competitive internationally. It is a day and night difference. People's lives will be radically transformed when we're in office. And what we're seeing right now with the PPP is that the budget is radically transformed, but people's lives are not radically transformed.
Elson, you talked about public servants there, and for as long as I know, governments have always had a problem with how do you pay public servants a livable wage? How do you pay teachers a livable wage? How do you pay government workers, the workers in the government? And I think over time I detect a mindset about public servants, about teachers, about soldiers, about policemen and women, that they're not productive workers. That when you talk about workers, you talk about the manufacturing workers, where we don't have that now because they mess up Gaiba, Guy Mine. So some of the ideologues will tell you, well, all the workers are the sugar workers, they're producing something. And that these other workers are not producing anything. Because nothing can explain to me that you now start getting money and you're running around the place giving out a $20,000 and $30,000 a year. And if you take all those little handouts and you put it together and say, I am going to use this block of money to pay public servants a living wage, that you'll be doing your country such a good turn. Why is it so difficult? For this government that is it doesn't have the excuse of previous governments. But it's so difficult to make right with public servants, with teachers, with nurses, with policemen. God forbid. But Venezuela is saying that they want to knock our heads off. It's those soldiers. Are we paying them a living wage? We can say not a blade of grass from now till the cows come home. If we don't pay our army members well, how are they going to stand up and defend us if push comes to shove? Talk to me.
You raise some key points. So let me give you something that I find to be so ironic that I think demonstrates really the fact that, again, government is totally delusional and disconnected from reality. We've got a problem where Guyanese nurses are leaving to go to the United Kingdom, right? That's been a serious issue. One of the concerns raised is the wages that are offered. But didn't I say to you earlier that at purchasing power parity, Guyana has a higher per capita income, per person income than the United Kingdom? So we're richer than the United Kingdom in that measure, but the nurses leaving to go to the United Kingdom. That's a perfect example of poor governance. Yes. You could easily pay the nurses more because the price levels in Guyana are lower. You don't need to pay them the same amount as in the United Kingdom. But even if you paid them half, it would be a comparable wage. You could easily do that and keep the nurses. Instead of doing that, you're paying the nurses way less than they need to be paid. And so they're leaving. That is a classic example of a delusional government. You don't understand that your GDP has grown so much that you blew straight past the United Kingdom in terms of per person wealth of the country, per person income of the country. You have capacity to pay people. You triple the national budget, therefore you could easily have doubled nurses' salaries, tripled nurses' salaries if necessary. But instead of that, you've not given the nurses enough pay, and the nurses are leaving to go to the United Kingdom. Classic example. But more than that, we must understand that the public service provides services to Guyanese. And if people are paid well, they'll provide good quality service, number one. But number two, and this is where we in the opposition believe that we need to improve on the existing system. We believe that public servants must always be looking at ways to improve our public service, our processes, service delivery, so that people will always be benefiting from better and better service delivery from our public servants. And that is something that we believe needs to be introduced into public service. The idea that each and every public servant is responsible for finding ways to do things better. And so we will be giving public servants much better pay. But we also want them to be always looking for ways to improve the system. That is going to be pretty critical because we need to run the country as efficiently as possible. And we need to provide people with good services, which they are entitled to as Guyanese. So that is one way of looking at it. But I would also say that, it is sad that there may be a discriminatory element to this, where they think that people of African descent are public servants, so they don't want to pay them. That's one element of it. But also just a lack of recognition that through a more efficient public service, through a better paid public service, there are economic benefits to be had. Teachers is really the quintessential example. If you pay your teachers well, you invest in teachers being able to grow their education by being able to go back to school, being able to qualify themselves better, having classrooms that are well funded. If you invest in that way, you can get better education outcomes. But if you don't invest in your teachers, is it any surprise that you've got math pass rates that are on the floor, that your common entrance pass rate never meets your targets or doesn't meet your targets? It's no surprise. But from our perspective, we will not be satisfied until Guyanese schools are performing as well as schools in Singapore or Finland or something like that. Because we have resources available. Guyanese deserve the best. And so we're going to use those resources to give them the best. We're going to keep going, pay our teachers well, the way that they're paid well in Finland and these other places, gradually pay them as well as that, and look for outcomes that are excellent outcomes.
Excellent outcome, Elson Low. Let me give you some quick ones here. Venezuela, are we doing enough on the Venezuelan border issue?
I believe we have to be very alert because I don't know about you, but I have pretty much never seen a referendum which includes military action on the ballot. That alarmed me, and I believe is seriously we must be very much alert because if the referendum goes in favor of military action, then it will prompt that government to maybe make some kind of provocation. So we must be very alert in that regard, and we must understand that this is a tense time, and every Guyanese must be paying close attention. Some of the things that we're hearing out of the trial at the ICJ today about Venezuela constructing airstrips and having their troops, massing troops on the border, again, very concerning. And we need the GPF to be on full alert regarding this. And we need to engage with the diplomatic community, our allies, our partners, to ensure that they're always aware of what is going on and can respond along with us swiftly if there is an issue. We've come to a point in world history, sad to say, where we're starting to see hot wars again. We previously saw some cold wars where people would be standoffish, but now we've come to hot wars, and what happens, unfortunately, is that sometimes conflict can be normalized. And so, if you've had one conflict in Ukraine, another conflict in Gaza, it could easily be another conflict here in the Escobar region. So we must remain alert. We must work together with our partners to ensure that that does not happen. But Venezuela is certainly a country that is an aggressor and that is not interested in following the rule of law.
CARICOM are our, if you will, natural allies. We are not sure that CARICOM is lockstep, lockstep with us on the Venezuelan issue. Is CARICOM still relevant for Guyana?
I'll say two things. The first is many people have expressed some disappointment that we've not seen a more vocal CARICOM. Many people have expressed some concern that we've seen some CARICOM leaders making remarks that seem a bit friendly to Venezuela, calling for peace for both sides to ensure there's an environment of peace when only one side is an aggressor. But I would say this: any CARICOM leader who is naive enough to think that it makes more sense to work along with Venezuela than to work along with Guyana, I think is doesn't have a good understanding of the facts. Venezuela, while it may have the largest oil reserves in the world, has never had the highest oil per capita in the world. Guyana has the second highest oil per capita. I don't want to use the word stupid, but it seems bizarre to me that someone would look at Venezuela as a partner when you've got a country that's going to be far wealthier on a per capita basis than Venezuela. I don't know why would somebody would think that. So that to me indicates that there's room for closer partnership with CARICOM. But I think some CARICOM leaders need to take a step back and really recognize what is going on. Guyana is not a country with some oil. It has more oil per person than even Saudi Arabia. What are you doing dealing with Venezuela? That's ridiculous. Anyway, I'm sure they'll figure it out with time. What we would encourage them to do, though, is to be thoughtful, to remember that we have a close cultural relationship, and that CARICOM, in terms of the movement of people, has tremendous capacity to help Guyana to meet its human capital needs, which are tremendous, as the country develops. And there can be a relationship between Guyana and CARICOM members, which helps the CARICOM region, the Caribbean region, to be one of the wealthiest and most prosperous in the world. It would seem strange to me to imagine that a country, last I checked, Venezuela has a 90% poverty rate or something like that. I don't know that they can help CARICOM with anything, right? It seems very bizarre that some CARICOM leaders think that. I think in time they will realize that they have a completely wrong-headed view of the situation.
And on that note, Elson Low, thank you very much for coming through tonight. And I hope that we will not have such a big gap in between our conversation. I take full responsibility for that gap because you've always been ready to come on for us to talk and to lend your expertise to our ongoing discussion here. Thank you very much.
Well, always happy to come on. Always an interesting discussion, very thought-provoking. And I look forward to catching up again with you.
Thank you. Thank you. young man there who, and it's always good to see young people because it's one of the things that we beat up on ourselves. We beat ourselves up on that our young people are not coming through. And I've always held a different view. I think young people are coming through. I think young people are ready to come through. But I think we have not done enough work of bringing them through. Times have changed. It was not like when I was young, we were driven just by idealism. Young people these days, their gaze is much broader than idealism. People like myself came of age within the first 2 decades of independence. We are far removed from the independence struggle in terms of years. And so we have to make allowance for the way in which young people are socialized. But I think that young people have the capacity to move this process forward. But I think we have to find them. We have to speak with the voice of the people and think with the minds of the people and march with the feet of the people. Brother Lassana Kwesi, a Trinidadian poet, a poet of the Black Power Revolution, I am quoting there. Good evening, Brother Albert Morgan, Audrey Brown. Good evening to all of you. Good evening to you, Maureen. It was nice having you all, and nice to have a young man talk to us like a big man. I think we are doing it. I think we're doing it. Tomorrow night, Coretta McDonald is going to be here to talk teachers' business. Teachers' business tomorrow night. So I want to thank you all. And again, I want to thank, on behalf of you all, thank Mark Benchop for sitting in for me last night. And I should see you all tomorrow night when Sister Coretta is going to be here.